I didn't know freedom was my number one value until they start getting chipped away. Kind of like a fish doesn't know it's swimming in water until you take it out of the water.
Yeah.
And then, I'm not the most educated person, but I know about history a little bit. So you recognize patterns in history. And a beautiful part about pattern recognition is you can see where you're at, what pattern is there, without having to wait 10 years for the full thing to play out. And I looked at patterns throughout history. I'm like, oh, we're in a pattern that doesn't end well if we allow it. It doesn't mean it will end well, but it's a pattern that could end really negatively based on what humans have done before. But of course, I'd pay attention to my own thinking and be like, oh, well, that could never happen here.
Yeah.
And then I started realizing, well, they all say that. It's a very arrogant thing for me to say. And I also realized, like, well, that's probably the mindset that allows bad things to happen, to deny that they could happen. So I start recognizing freedom's important to me. And in the work, even when I was doing like all the yoga stuff, conscious community stuff, the work was always about calling out lies and corruption. Typically in the spiritual stuff from our own egos, how we'd be egotistical, but hide it in noble looking hiding spots so we can pretend we're above it. So I start doing that more at a social level with what was going on with the mandates and stuff from the authority figures. And once I started doing that, I realized how big of a deal it is, because I saw backlash. And I was, well, why are y'all people getting upset about this? I'm like advocating for freedom, calling out what looks like bad behavior, calling out hypocrisies. And that's when I realized I had a decision. Freedom's now a political issue, which is mind-boggling in America. So the decision is, do I keep talking about what my heart is calling me to talk about and risk losing audience, alienating people, getting people mad at me, getting deplatformed? Or do I play it safe and talk about things that are vanilla and avoid my heart's calling? But I just realized that there's no decision here. I know my result, or I know where my heart's at, and I realized like I'd rather risk losing everything, the online following, all the things I've built up. I'd rather risk losing that in the name of being true to my truth. And then it turns out it's been the best thing I've ever done for business. The following grew exponentially, and I realized like, oh, what I'm voicing actually represents the voice and thinking for a lot of people that don't feel they have a voice to represent them through traditional media. And not that I like, dude, let's stand for freedom, it's a good business move. I'm not that smart to like see that would be wise. But seeing our freedoms eroded away was the deciding factor of like, oh, that's why I'm doing this shift with my content. And then I'll just footnote that the other piece of motivation is April 7th, 2020 is the day I found out my wife was pregnant with our little boy. Y'all have a beautiful little one, so you know when God entrusts you to steward this soul into this incarnation and like this physical plane, it's not the end all be all, but this is such a sacred experience to be gifted this lifetime. Taking that responsibility of my son's soul meant so much to me, and y'all know you'll do anything to protect and preserve that little one's life, and part of that means protecting their future. So I knew with my son coming into this world, there's a conversation I'm not willing to have with him where I have to explain two things. Number one, what freedom was. And number two, why his father didn't do anything about it when he had a chance. So knowing my son deserves to swim in his birthright of freedom, because to me, freedom is God's way. Fear, evil, for me, that's constriction, that's control. That's the opposite of freedom. To me, God, it's expansion, it's freedom. So knowing the importance of my son, I wanted to do my small little part to contribute to the world that he deserves to live in. So that made it so I looked at the situation of, dude, it's kind of, I could play it safe or I could play it dangerously. And I've learned it's kind of a paradox where now we're living in a time, I think it's where our warrior spirit is being called. So I believe we're living in a time where playing it safe is the most dangerous thing we could do. But living dangerously, which I think is where our hearts usually guide us to go, living dangerously is paradoxically the safest thing we could do. Right. Because we just have to ask the question, what if we don't follow the call? What then? And in my opinion, that's where the real danger comes from.
Way worse, for sure.
Hi friends, if you enjoyed this clip and want to watch the entire episode, click the link in the description of this video to enjoy it. And don't forget to subscribe.